It is possible to drop military personnel in armored pods, lightly armored pods anyway, from altitudes of 35,000 or 40,000 feet. The pod would look like a disc. Oblate spheroid is the fancy terms for it. If it has a 12-foot diameter, you might be able to get 6 soldiers into it. There wouldn't be enough room for 8 soldiers. It would be dropped out the back door of a air freighter, C-17. A parachute would pull out a streamlining shroud and hold the streamlining shroud taut. If the pod just exits by itself, as it's descending, you're going to get turbulent airflow over its top. This will make the pod unstable, potentially might make it flip, and to make it very uncomfortable to ride in. It would also slow down the time of fall. If you have a shroud extended, the airflow around the pod becomes much smoother, and the drop speed also increases. As it falls down, when it approaches the ground close enough, the streamlining shroud would separate, a larger parachute would open, and some rocket motors would deploy. Underneath the pod, airbags would inflate. As it approaches the ground, the rocket motors would fire, slowing it down, and the airbags would also work to reduce the impact of the ground. Inside, the soldiers would be lying down on benches. The benches underneath would have some form of support, which can collapse if there's a bad landing, and at least give them some chance of surviving. When it emerges from the airplane, the one thing you have to be very concerned about is going into a spin. If it does that, a tumbling spin, there's probably no survivability. So what would have to be built into it are some kind of small rocket motors, perhaps solid fuel, that would ignite, counter any spin, and restabilize it enough for the streamlining shroud to be deployed and the object to fall to the ground smoothly. The outside of the pod would be 4 large panels which would serve as aerodynamic steering devices, and so they could turn to direct the pod to a pre-designated point on the ground. This would enable a large number of pods to be dropped simultaneously and land at a designated point, effectively creating a large-scale commando raid. Each group of soldiers would know exactly where they are. They would emerge from the pod. They would each have a specific responsibility: attack a certain building, set up at a given point, or perform some other function. The drop speed could be perhaps as high as 500 feet per second, or about 70, 80 seconds, a minute and a quarter to a minute and a half to drop from altitude and reach the ground. The amount of time of warning from the flight is very variable and depends on atmospheric conditions. Assuming you're approaching on a dark night, with a large number of aircraft approaching, you might hear them perhaps 50 miles away. Speed of sound of about 740, 750 miles per hour, that would be 1/15 of an hour, or about 4 minutes at ground level. At altitude, the speed of sound is slower and is more on the order of 640 miles per hour, which would give you about 1/13 of an hour, or about 4.6 minutes. The pathway of sound can be convoluted depending on various temperature gradients, but you're somewhere between 4 and 4.6 minutes for the sound to arrive. The aircraft, flying at a speed of, let's say, 540 miles per hour, would take about 1/11 of an hour, or about 5.5 minutes to arrive. That gives you 0.9 minutes to about 1.5 minutes. Difference between the arrival of the sound and the actual arrival of the airplane, plus the drop time of the pod, and they would have about 3 minutes of warning. So if the aircraft can be heard 50 miles away, there'd be about 3 minutes of warning on the ground. Now, obviously, if they have radar systems, that's a different matter. If the radar can't be jammed, the aircraft could be seen 200 miles away. Also, as the aircraft cross a frontier, people with radios or telephones could call people and tell them that the aircraft are coming. A large area would have to go on alert, and a specific location would not know it's being targeted until a relatively short reaction time. Before the soldiers reach the ground, additional bombers could drop explosive bombs on specific targets, and even something like a fuel air bomb could be detonated to disrupt and confuse people on the ground. Obviously, there would have to be separation between the bombs and the fuel air bombs and the pods descending to prevent injury to the soldiers inside the pods. When the pods arrive on the ground, the soldiers would stand up from the couches. Any restraint system would have to be released. They would then pick up packs and rifles before preparing to emerge from the pod. One possibility is to have smoke grenade launchers on the outside of the pod and firing them, and perhaps flash grenades as well, before the soldiers emerge to obscure their exit and to at least momentarily ruin the night vision of anybody looking at them. The control panels for steering the pod would also provide some at least visual protection and could have a slight Kevlar lining to help slow down fragmentation in bullets. The pod itself would be made out of a combination of aluminum and Kevlar, or perhaps even titanium armor, and it would slow down fragmentation in bullets and give them some protection as they descend to the ground. The fact that each pod should be steerable to within a relatively small amount of distance, maybe even 10 feet or less, that specific target, enables each group of soldiers to have a specific specific duty, a specific responsibility, a specific target. And this is why it would resemble a large-scale commando raid and would be a very effective way of attacking some targets.